Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 73rd episode of the PB Political Podcast. I'm Ishan Pokro,
And I'm Michael Boddicker.
and today we're here doing a general update on the world of politics. We've been out for a while, but we're back into it today and cover some topics, anything from the TikTok ban bill that passed the House recently, up to the State of the Union that was a couple weeks ago, and even touching on some presidential politics. So, Boddicker, what's going on?
Apologies everyone that this episode's a bit late. I've been tremendously under the weather since about Saturday. So my voice has been pretty shot. And of course, right before recording today, my voice sounds the best it's sounded in days. Maybe that's with the help of some trusty water. Probably going to be drinking water heavily throughout this episode. There's just been a ton going on. Obviously, we missed the State of the Union as well. And that was crazy. And the thing is actually because we're so far from it now, we're starting to see if there's any effects, if at all, from the State of the Union. I've got an article here from NPR, that does the highlights of it. And then there's another article here from NBC News talking about how Biden actually hasn't received a polling bump from the State of the Union, which is pretty interesting because usually the president receives some sort of bump. President Trump actually got this pretty solidly. Because the State of the Union always seemed to be the one speech that he could stay on script to. So he usually actually got a pretty favorable bump from the State of the Unions. But nothing for Biden so far at the moment, and that may be a bad sign for his re-election in November.
Yeah, I mean, his State of the Union was, I would say, this is what I'll say about his State of the Union. Whenever they, had him on, he definitely was on some kind of stimulant, just the way, the drop-off. The first hour, he was very energetic. He was lively. I mean, Biden's big strength, I feel like, has always been not really him speaking. It's his able to return fire on members of Congress that are heckling him. And I don't think it came off that well, but seeing a little bit of the energy, I think definitely excited people. You can see the mainstream media, all of the media outlets were really going. Were really saying that their concerns about Biden, about his age, about his fitness, really were alleviated. I don't think it did that much. I don't think we were at that level of concerns being allayed from just the State of the Union speech. I think if he does something like that at a debate stage, if he debates, that's a little bit better when you're really not reading a teleprompter, when you're not waiting on applause breaks every 20 seconds after everything you say. So I think, in the polling, I have some polls pulled up. Most recently, general election, looking at the swing state polling, Marist just released some polling. Decent pollster, I would say, always up there. Across some states, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, in a two-way race, Biden is still trailing to President Trump, and then in a three-way race with RFK Jr., Trump expands his lead by a couple points against Biden. Obviously, Georgia is a big state for President Biden if he wants to retain the office of the presidency. So, no State of the Union bump. I think Trump actually did always get a little bit of a bump after the State of the Union, and don't really think Biden's gotten that, despite what the media says.
Well, and it's just interesting, too, like you mentioned, the RCP polling. This is more of the general election polling, but as of this day, as of our day of recording, March 20th, 2016, Hillary Clinton was up 8.7 points on Trump. As of this day, 2020, Biden was up 7.4. As of today, 2024, Trump is up 2. So Trump has improved his standing by almost 11 points in 8 years and almost 10 points in 4 years, which for a president running for, I guess technically not re-election, but he's running again for election, and especially considering everything that's gone on with his own life. I think I say it probably in every recap we do, but it's pretty astounding to see his numbers.
I agree. And I think, and again, actually we can talk fully about the general election because this is something we haven't covered, at least in podcast form. I know we wrote an article on this, but President Trump and President Biden have officially clinched the nominations of the Democratic and Republican parties. So now we're headed for our first rematch since 1956, I believe. It's when Dwight D. Eisenhower beat Adlai E. Stevenson in a rematch of the 1952 election. So it's been almost 70 years since we've seen this rematch, and Actually, what's kind of funny? I think they were both alive and cognizant during that election, Trump and Biden, which is kind of scary. I mean, President Biden's 81, Trump's 78, right? 78, 79. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
it's kind of funny.
We talked about this. We don't want to go into it because I think we'll talk about it in detail next week when it comes out. But the caveat of RFK, what is he going to do, and how is he polling?
Yeah.
TBD. He's starting to his PAC not his PAC, but the PAC that is more associated with his campaign. Shout out DNC for saying they basically are the same thing. But helping get him on the ballot in a bunch of different states. Well, RFK is going to be making his VP pick next week. A couple of cool people. Mike Rowe could be a pick. I think everybody kind of likes Mike Rowe. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when it actually happens, more of the candidates and all that stuff. But Mike Rowe, famous TV show host. He's kind of, I would also say, in that RFK sphere of people. But of course, Aaron Rodgers, New York Jets quarterback. I almost said Green Bay Packers there. The sports nerd in me was struggling a bit with that. And then obviously former Minnesota governor and WWE wrestler Jesse Ventura. We've been joking since Rodgers was announced that, imagine Rodgers misses like a playoff game because he has to RFK wins and the government's shut down, so the Senate's in session on like a Sunday, and he's got to miss the playoffs to go preside over the Senate. Earth-shatteringly horrible.
The least likely part of that is that the Jets make the playoffs. But
could you imagine being a Jets fan and it's like late January and the government's shut down and your star quarterback has to last a miss?
Yeah,
miss probably what would be like what the AFC Conference Championship game
at that point,
the
divisional round,
late after.
Yeah. I think like the Kennedy campaign's doing is smart though. They've promised, RFK himself has promised that he's kind of been on social media recently, been like, hey, the media is getting this wrong, but who I've picked is going to, I think he's like shake up the establishment. He has to shake up the establishment. Now, there's been names floated, like you said. We're going to talk about this next week when he actually makes his pick and announces it on Tuesday. I think it's been smart to float, because they clearly have been like floating these names out there. They've been putting out Aaron Rodgers, getting the sports world. I've seen ESPN, I've seen NFL Twitter, everybody going crazy. Like, oh my god! First thing, that's probably something that would never even enter their brain, like anybody's brains, that someone could be a vice president. But it's also it's a smart move, I think, getting into new markets. Making his name known, Aaron Rodgers might get picked, and then it's Jesse Ventura, which I think would be a good pick, but I think of all the names that we've said so far, Ventura is the most likely, but we'll see. I have no idea. I don't think it will be Nicole Shanahan real quick, just because I believe Kennedy's, I don't know if they thought about this, but Kennedy's home state is California, and Nicole Shanahan's also California. She is did you say Nicole Shanahan?
I did not.
Okay,
I did not.
Sorry,
Nicole Shanahan. I apologize.
Yeah, she's. I don't really know anything about her, which might be a good thing for most people. But the thing is, her home state's also California. Then they have the electoral vote thing, where you can't take the electoral votes from the same states. That's something that's a wrinkle you can throw in there. But we'll see who it is. Yeah, and it'll be a fun week after this to see how this campaign really kicks off, because the reason this pick's coming in so early is because you have to have a vice president to get on a lot of ballots across the country as an independent. So RFK Jr. is going quickly here to name a vice president. That way you can start getting on the ballot in more states. I believe he's like 5 or 6 states already. They seem pretty confident they'll get to all 50. We'll see. It could be a fun race. Anything else on the State of the Union? You want to get to the main?
State of the Union. And just shout out NPR that they've got just some highlight moments. Ukraine support. That's what I would call both a Democratic and I would say almost more establishment Republican priority. The Democratic Party is pretty united on Ukraine. And then the Republicans, the more establishment Republicans, your Lindsey Grahams of the world, Mitt Romney's probably of the world, the Murkowski's, the more establishment Republicans are still, I think, pretty pro-Ukraine. But they're just in tough. Some of those Republicans being in tough areas where a vote for Ukraine is, not a great vote at looking at their constituencies. So, that's not surprising. And I do think we're going to see, and even former President Trump has actually talked about Ukraine in a different way, like with loans and other stuff. So there's still bipartisan appeal for Ukraine aid. I just think it's going to depend on, one, the geopolitical environment with how the next 6 or 12 months go. I mean, there's war going on across the world at the moment, and we're going to touch on a little bit more of that as we get through the speech. But, yeah, there's a lot going on, and Ukraine aid is starting – it has been faltering for probably, a year now, I would say?
Yeah, just about, honestly, yeah.
Just about a year. It's kind of been faltering. And then we kind of move on a little bit, and we'll get back to the war because I think they're going to talk about Gaza, but a big spotlight on abortion, reproductive rights. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, I think they got 25 tickets for 25 guests, and a lot of them were reproductive rights. So a woman named Kate Cox from Texas who was forced to travel out of state for an abortion. And then another woman from Alabama, actually, when we had all of this stuff going on with IVF that our Supreme Court ruled, her treatments were paused after the state Supreme Court ruled that embryos are legally children.
Yeah.
Basically, he promised to codify Roe, and with the quote being, "If Americans send me a Congress that supports the right to choose."
Let's talk about that for a second because there's been how many Congresses, at least 2, since Obama was president, where they could have easily codified Roe v. Wade. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, like, again, the abortion argument, if you're a Democrat running in November, that's your winning argument. Despite what the numbers are from the Fed on employment, inflation, you're not going to win on the economy. That's not going to happen. You're going to win on social issues like abortion. IVF, crazy ruling out of Alabama. I think we can both agree on that. Wild stuff, really out of nowhere. You can see the state legislature moved quickly to protect IVF. We'll see how that goes.
I think it already passed, didn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think it's already passed.
The most expedited bill in Alabama history.
Very out of the box. I'm going to give the legislature a little bit of benefit of the doubt because I assume, I think it's pretty fair to say they're not. I think that the line of thinking that the justice took in the SCOTUS ruling is a very unorthodox line, not common sentiment of conservative minds for the most part. I know Catholic conservatives have a little bit of sympathy with the ruling, but that's not the majority of the constituency. That's your argument to win in November. Abortion, IVF, things like that, because otherwise, President Biden hasn't. I don't think. He can say whatever he wants in the State of the Union. Obviously, Israel, Gaza, very poor public opinion on the handling of that. It's the perception, at least even from my perspective, just been like the United States has just kind of been steamrolled by Israel, mainly because like the pure willingness to really cater to anything. Even like President Biden sets quote unquote red lines, but then you can see like they're just overrun, and then it is what it is. So you can agree with that, disagree with that. That is, I would say, what's happening, and it's what we can both agree on is that it's not popular, at least especially in the party, among the young voters, among the more progressive wing of the party. I think that's definitely something that's going to hurt him. So I think coming out on abortion, he had some good lines. He had some good like clapbacks on abortion. I think he addressed the Supreme Court at one point, referring to abortion, which was kind of interesting. But yeah, I think it'll take much more than a few good lines to really have any impact on his re-election standing. And this is considering President Trump is over here with like 75 charges or whatever against him still, even after some get dropped, just like hanging out over here, potentially being charged of criminal. Although it seems like the trials might get pushed past the election. There's so much going on. It's going to be a lot of fun going into the summer and the fall.
Well, like you said with Gaza, I was going to touch on that for just another second. That is such a political death trap for Democrats, more specifically. Republicans are pretty united in support for Israel. Democrats, this is probably the one issue that divides that party. That divides the party more than anything is the Israel-Gaza-Palestine issue. It's interesting because, Biden's just in a really tough spot with this issue, and congressional Democrats are as well, and particularly with youth voters, with young voters. it's actually rare that maybe this is an issue that Biden's more with Republicans on actually than than a lot of his critical constituencies.
Yeah, I mean, Biden, I think a lot of people, and I heard people talk about this the other day, and it's a good point. I mean, people have very short memories, or they just don't know how President Biden was when he's in the Senate for a long time. I mean, President Biden is by no means has been like a progressive working class, like the picture that they try to portray him as in the 2020 election, like a working class warrior or whatever. I mean, he's from Delaware. We all know Delaware is like the credit haven of the United States. Like, he's not from a state. He's not like, I mean, frankly, like, you can hate Bernie Sanders, you can like Bernie Sanders. I respect Bernie Sanders for like his conviction, even if I don't agree with him. I mean, he's pretty much what he says he is, right? Biden isn't that. He's clearly pretty inauthentic, but he has been very, consistent on Israel. Clearly, he has a very big conviction for Israel. So it is, yeah. I think. I mean, honestly, whatever he did, if he took a more, I guess, Gaza-friendly stance in a sense, or anti-Israel stance, I don't know. That's not a good way to say it, but if he took a more mediated stance on this, then the whole party would switch. I mean, it's a detriment of his own making that they haven't moderated their stance. Because I mean, and honestly, at the same time, I don't see why like Freedom Caucus Republicans aren't taking the more libertarian, no aid to Israel, or like moderated aid, let's just stay out of their business. If you're gonna do the same for Ukraine, so like there's like a lot of dynamics. Obviously, Israel is a much more.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because it's a fresh conflict as well. I think we're gonna see those Freedom Caucus calls. Give it till the end of the year. Give it to the start of the new administration. But I also think that the corruption concerns that the Freedom Caucus echo aren't considered the same with Israel, and you can also say that there's partially some of those religious ties, but also there are religious people in Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
But I just think that the age of the conflict right now is not enough where you're getting those spending hawks.
Yeah.
Oh no, well, Israel aid? No, absolutely not. And then so we get there. And speaking of another, I guess, foreign conflict that's arrived here in the States, the border. Immigration.
Oh yeah.
Immigration is probably going to take over the economy as the number one issue of this election.
I think it's already there.
And it is already there, and I think it's going to continue, which actually may be good news for Biden. Even though he's wildly unpopular on immigration, the economy is the number one driver of votes. The people that are going to vote that are angry about immigration, I would say, are probably going to be conservatives and conservative-leaning independents. There may be angry left-leaning independents or Democrats that are really angry about immigration, but I don't know if they're going to stomach a Trump vote versus the economy where when people's wallets are actually hurting. And like we saw last year and the year before, those, where people aren't feeling great about the economy at all, that's going to influence a Trump vote versus a Biden vote. I don't know if immigration is going to have the same impact of changing someone who would normally vote for Biden into voting for Trump. I don't think immigration has that same effect as when someone's feeling it in their wallet.
It's possible. I think the one place immigration could play a real factor is the Sun Belt, not the western part of the Sun Belt. Arizona. Yeah. Arizona's a very close state. I mean, there was like hope that for Democrats, that Texas could shift blue. Honestly, Texas is going through it with immigration. They're currently at war with the federal government over who gets to handle immigration policy in the state of Texas. And I just think that any shot that Democrats would take Texas, although it was very slim to start with. Hey, it's possible Colin Allred, the Senate candidate, can win against Ted Cruz, but I just don't. I think President Biden, forget any chance of winning Texas. And the problem is, like, the same thing, is there a risk of Arizona just because of the way the border's been going? Does that mean it has downstream effects? Does that mean Carrie Lake wins a Senate seat over Ruben Gallego? I don't know if that's going to happen. It might happen, might not happen. I think Gallego's polling higher right now, but I mean, like, that stuff is, and then again, presidential, you have to factor in the third party bids. There's Arizona. I saw a poll. It's definitely an outlier. RFK was at 26% in Arizona in a three-way race, which is crazy. I think it's definitely an outlier. It has to be, but I mean, all these factors are just wildly, like, they're everything's so uncertain right now that you can't even, like, he had just a new poll from Arizona, 18% Kennedy, 33 Biden, 37 Trump. There's so many factors. This is going to be a crazy election. Honestly, if it goes the way it looks like it's going, one of the craziest we're going to see in our lifetime, if not the craziest. Like, I think there's a genuine chance we go to a contingent election if we get like if things keep going on this track, it's possible, but we'll see.
Well, and we talked about like how the 2020 and because we're old enough to remember 2020 and 2016. I vaguely remember 2012, and I only have a fleeting maybe memory of 2008. 2008, I remember maybe a scene of my parents in the living room watching it or something. 2012, really didn't know that too much about. I mean, we were in elementary school, but I mean, obviously we were old enough to be like, oh, there's an election going on.
Yeah.
What's going on? Who are you going
I remember 2012, like hearing the NPR thing the next day, like Obama landslide over Romney. You know, I remember that.
Yeah, and that's all we remember from that. We didn't actually do any research on our own. 2016 was my freshman year of high school, and I remember writing a paper about the election that year. So that was the first election that I followed closely. 2008 wasn't there wasn't a lot of animosity in that election, but also because Obama and McCain ran not really very negative campaigns. Obama was a very positive, kind of uplifting campaign, and so kind of was McCain's too. I don't think McCain was particularly he didn't really go after Obama. 2008 or 2012, Mitt Romney really didn't go after. I mean, he did.
He tried, yeah.
I really don't think Mitt Romney actually had that kind of animosity. 2016 was crazy. 2020 was crazier. I honestly think the animosity this year is it's just peaking higher and higher, which isn't good, obviously. Which means that the party, not the the Republican or Democrat, but the party of people, the assortment of people that whoever it may be loses, they're going to be pretty upset.
Yeah.
And, I mean, in a way that 2016 or 2020, I mean, remember 2016 won the liberal tiers or whatever in the cities.
Yeah.
Then 2020, you've got the election deniers, and then we get January 6th. Well, you have an election now where people are like, okay, here we go again. This is the one. This is the big one. And that's always scary.
Yeah, and the media obviously has not been helping. I think there was a recent President Trump rally where he said that if automobile manufacturing gets sent over to China or something like that, or so I don't even know. He said the term bloodbath, and it was taken out of probably honestly one of the most egregious things I've seen in a while from the media, like painting it to where Trump basically said if he loses the election, he didn't even say this. He said if he loses the election, then manufacturing will be Chinese companies won't be able, or if he wins the election, Chinese companies won't be able to sell cars in the U.S. I believe that's what it was. And our wonderful mainstream media took that to basically mean if President Trump loses the election, he says there will be a bloodbath in 2024, which is insane. Like, that's so malicious. Just like for not even you can be whatever. Like, that's just an insanely malicious thing to do, regardless who it is. And they're not really helping. And speaking of media, let's do the last part of what we're talking about today, the TikTok resolution, as it's being known, HR 7521, sponsored by Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin's 8th, who is actually retiring to probably go lobby. So shout out to him for his 4-term career in the House. Was kind of seen as a rising star of the national security wing of the Republicans, but now is clearly retiring from Congress for whatever reason. So Monica, take us to the.
We'll see what he does. I think there's more to come from.
I'm sure there is. I'm just saying he might lobby. He might lobby for a little bit and go run for Senate. I think he's an interesting character. Yeah, he's a very consistent man. I'll say that. So yeah. But take us to the bill. I guess what you like the highlights.
Well, as someone that has extensive experience answering angry people with this bill, the bill. So a lot of people think that this bill just directly bans TikTok. It doesn't. Now, it might ban it in 6 months, but it doesn't now. It basically says that TikTok needs to be sold to an American company or American owner, or even essentially a non-adversarial owner. And it defines adversary as Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And it's not directly. TikTok is mentioned in the bill, but it's not the. It's probably we can assume it's the direct object of the bill. But it kind of the way that they do it and the way that they wrote the bill encompasses apps that are from those countries that I mentioned that basically are seen by the DOJ to be a national security threat. TikTok is pretty unanimously seen, at least among national security people that I know and that I've talked to, Every single one of them was in favor of this that I kind of asked about. It's like, how do you feel about it? Every national security person I know was like, get it as far away from everybody as possible. The difficulty is that famously we've been really bad about letting Meta or Instagram or Facebook or whoever it may be steal our data. So the problem is that a lot of people, when they're being told that, hey, China's stealing our data, well, they kind of say, how is that any different than what Facebook or Meta or Instagram does? And the problem is that's a nuanced conversation that you have to have with them to say, hey, you'd much rather have your data in Zuckerberg's hands than you would in the CCP's hands. And some people would genuinely say no. And some people, whatever. So, it's a difficult piece of legislation because you're really regulating something that a lot of people like and use. And that's something that's really tough to do in any aspect of life. When you are, it's kind of like when we would do something at school and the principal's like, yeah, you can't do that anymore. Well, then everyone kind of gets mad. They're like, well, why not? It kind of makes them frustrated. Well, that's what's happening with TikTok.
Yeah.
It's tough. There are First Amendment concerns from some people, and it's probably going to get taken to the courts of where do we draw the line between national security and freedom of speech, especially considering it's a foreign-owned company. If it was an American-owned company, I really think they would struggle to ban it. But because it's a foreign-owned company, then that gives them much more of a leg to stand on. Versus Instagram or Meta or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think this is a problem. So I actually am, I guess we're taking two opposite sides. I'm actually against this bill, just on the grounds that, I think giving the president the authority to determine what is this national security threat in this regard is a little interesting, not in a good way for me.
Yeah.
And, so I think, what was I going to say? Yeah, so this is kind of a problem of our own making as a country. When you give companies like TikTok, I guess Meta, which is Facebook, Instagram, Facebook bought these they're buying you're kind of self-fulfilling your prophecy like a monopoly state, because you have Facebook buying up competitors early on, knocking them out of business. Snapchat doing the same. Who bought Vine? Someone bought Vine, right?
Yeah.
That's a problem that Google buying companies, these things, YouTube buying company, all this stuff is which is Google. So this is a problem of our own making. I feel like I get the aspect ideally. So I guess the problem is one part of this solution just doesn't work. You want regulation to come through. You want American companies to own these means of production in a sense, because then you have regulation power over them. That's where it's broken right now. You don't have that power. That power is not being exercised. I think if you're going to be a regulation hawk, the FTC is I would say the FTC has been much more aggressive under President Biden. I think Lena Khan is the head, and she's been much more progressive, I guess, forward searching in the sense of regulation and stuff. But yeah, I think the bill was kind of, and that's the problem. This is going to be a cultural war. This is the culture war. It's gonna be who is who. I guess Americans are just Facebook has my data, so why can TikTok not have my data? It's there's no trust that these companies like Meta and I guess Alphabet is Google's company.
Yeah.
They're not being upstanding with your data. It looks
hypocritical. It looks hypocritical.
Yeah, Americans know they're not there's no. These are transnational corporations, so they're not sitting there just because Alphabet's headquartered in the United States, that doesn't really mean that they're going to put the American citizens first. I think it's a pretty well known. That's not a lie. It's true. So I think Americans see through that. And that's the hypocrisy that you're talking about. That's where people really see now. This really doesn't do anything. And I kind of agree with them.
Well, it's tough legislating on something like this. It's a difficult spot to be in, and I would hate to be a legislator having to write and do on stuff like this. It's just difficult. And I think it's going to get taken to the courts as well. I think that, we talked about the Supreme Court and how important they've been in the last 5 years. I think this one gets kicked to them.
Yeah, I don't really know how it's going to go. And, I mean, the Senate needs to take it up. No one knows if the Senate will take this up. This is going to be a risky one. Not risky, but like it's going to be a hot button one to watch. And if we look at the no votes, I mean, Republicans that voted no, I'll read the list off here. Andy Biggs of Arizona, Dan Bishop, North Carolina, Davidson of Ohio, Duarte, California, Gates, Florida, Green, Georgia, Higgins, Louisiana, Mace, South Carolina, Massey, Kentucky, who I'm going to give a shout out to Thomas Massey. That's my guy. He's really the only one he led the debate on the con side, the nay side. And I think even though these are all really Freedom Caucus members, like it's outside of Massey, I don't think he's really in the Freedom Caucus.
Duarte, I don't think is either, or Higgins.
Yeah.
McClintock isn't. Mooney, I don't think is.
The others, Schweikert might not be either.
But Schweikert, I don't think is. Stubbe, I don't think is either.
Regardless,
Benson as well, he may not be.
I wonder what the list of contrarian Republicans versus really, I guess, more principled nay votes is. I mean, knowing Thomas Massey, reading listening to his argument, clearly the leader of the principled side. But like you said, like McClintock, Mooney, Moore of Alabama, Perry, Schweikert, and Stubbe to round out the list. Only 15 no votes from Republicans, which is very fascinating because Republicans tend to be the more conservative side. Have been kind of more of the pro First Amendment recently. I guess you would say like the ball's kind of flipped on censorship. You would think over in the internet age, with the rise of tech companies and more progressive. You know what I'm saying. So the fact that only 15 Republicans voted against a bill that would possibly negate, I guess, freedom of expression in a sense is somewhat interesting. I think it shows a little bit more of where the real tide, it kind of shows where they balance national security against, I guess you would say, freedom of expression. I find that interesting. I think there's 60 Democratic no votes, 50 Democratic no votes. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I feel like I'm kind of rambling. But it is interesting to look at the priority shift, I would say, from some Republicans.
Yeah, this one's just I hate saying it that it's unique, but this one is a really tough. This is not one of the consequences of the digital age, but this is one of those digital age things that's very, very interesting. And I don't know if there's a ton of precedent. I don't know, back in World War I or World War II, obviously the government censored and did and regulated stuff. Probably that was German or Japanese or
they censored Japanese people. FDR did. So I mean,
yeah. To the United States, Executive Order 9066.
I believe so, something like that.
They did indeed. Turns out not the best idea. But yeah, this is just a really interesting bill at a really interesting time because this is it's not a foreign policy bill in itself, but it's a foreign policy bill, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just, this is part of that ongoing Cold War, you can call it, with the CCP. Because this is one of the, the main ways, proponents of the bill argue, TikTok's one of the main ways that the CCP exerts its influence in the United States. Is it right that the CCP can manipulate data, censoring stuff that, about Tiananmen Square or about Taiwan or about Hong Kong. There's evidence that I think China was triangulating the locations of TikTok users in Hong Kong. We're talking about protests to suppress protests.
Yeah.
If you phrase it that way, that probably makes it a lot more appealing to people who are against it. Mm-hmm. Now, when you take it here to the States and stuff, that, a lot of people get their news, or a lot of people are making money off of TikTok, and, people that, proponents of the bill are saying that, it's great that you're doing that, but the problem is the people that own the company are doing, whatever it may be with. So it's a sticky situation.
It gets weird, yeah. And there's the argument, I think the best argument, quote unquote, you could say is well, China doesn't let American companies operate in China, so why should we let them do it here? So that's the argument is a valid one, but then you get into question of, do you value, I don't know if expression is because it's weird because it's not American companies, so do they have the same First Amendment rights if they operate here. I don't know.
Especially when, I mean, considering, yeah, like do we consider a British company? Like, I think that the crux of the issue too is we don't put a British company or a French or a German company on the same axis as we put a Chinese company or a Russian company or a North Korean company. Those companies are in a completely different sphere of how do we feel about them versus if the Telegraph wants to come over here, and I'm sure there's 1,000 employees for the Telegraph, the British newspaper over here in the States, and I don't think they need to have any fear of not being around anytime soon. They're going to be here for as long as they want to be.
I guess the question, just the main concern I guess I have, it just comes down to allowing the president to make this decision unilaterally, and that just goes into the expanding role of the president since FDR, really since the Great Depression. So so that's where it gets a little bit hazy. Just to bring it back to the vote, the only Gen Z member of Congress, Maxwell Alejandro Frost of Florida's 10th congressional district, I believe, did vote no, and he voted against this bill. So it seems as if Gen Z's only representative, Gen Z is 100% against a TikTok ban. That's what that says. So if you guys were wondering,
I can't argue with statistics. I can't. You win this.
So Gen Z is fully against it. Interestingly, Gallego also voted no. So we'll see if he's also a young guy. So interesting stuff here on the TikTok ban.
That's about all we got today, right? I mean, we pretty much hit the nail on the head on what we wanted to cover today. I mean, there's been so much going on, and we've got another presidential history, Bush v. Gore, coming up.
Oh yeah, when you get Bush v. Gore
up next week. I mean, and the impending Black Swan event that I assume is going to happen at any point soon. That who knows what that could be. That I'm sure we're going to have to cover.
Yeah, we're going to do next week. We'll be talking about RFK Jr.'s. We don't know if it'll be a full episode, but I just do a quick thing on it. RFK Jr.'s VP pick coming out next week in Oakland, California, next Tuesday. We'll do a reaction podcast to that, and then Bush v. Gore. We got a couple more election histories, knock them out before the summer. After that, who knows? So if y'all have any ideas for us, let us know. If y'all want to write for us and anything like that, email us, contact us anyway. And we're happy to accommodate you. It's going to be a fun, hopefully fun summer and fall. A lot of stuff going on. And thank y'all for listening. You guys know where to find us. I'm Ishan Pokrell.
I'm Mike Boddicker.
And goodbye.